Good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started, if that's okay. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this panel, and I have the fortune to have been asked to moderate a discussion between four faculty representatives to discuss the intersections of COIL and research, and how the COIL model of virtual exchange supports research, why it's valuable, what challenges exist, and what we can learn from trailblazers in that intersection, like our panelists. My name is Kyle Kastler, and I represent the Stevens Initiative, like my executive director, who helped moderate the panels earlier, Christine Shao. I am really happy to be here today to help facilitate this conversation. So if you're just joining us, the Stevens Initiative is an international leader in virtual exchange, which helps bring young people from diverse places together to collaborate and connect through everyday technology. And you might know the Stevens Initiative for our grant making or advocacy work, but we also do a lot of work in the research area of virtual exchange. And so in my work for the initiative, I help lead our team's research work where we share resources and promising practices to improve the impact of virtual exchange programs worldwide. We conduct an annual survey of the field, which just closed, and we'll be sharing that report later this fall. We share evaluation data from our grantees and our participants, and we maintain a set of standards for the emerging field. You can learn more about our research work at stevensinitiative.org and by clicking on our resources page. Lots there when it comes to research. So one thing I'll mention before I turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, when putting this panel together, there was a lot of thought about including the topic of assessment also, but I think there was some discussion in the panelists, and I agreed that the focus today will be on research and publication, recognizing that assessment and evaluation of COIL is really important, and that it intersects with research a lot. And so while recognizing that that's a large topic of interest that could very well fill its own panel, we are going to focus on research and publication today. But I will say that our colleagues who are here today from AAC&U will be doing a different panel next week at 8 a.m. virtually, that's free, on the topic of assessment and evaluation in COIL. And so if you want information on how to access that panel, you can talk to me or you can talk to Veronica. Veronica, if you want to raise your hand, and we can get you that information. So everybody wins, right? Okay, so enough of me talking. Let's introduce the panelists. So I'm very fortunate to be joined today by these researchers. I'm going to ask these pairs who've been working together to introduce themselves and share a very quick description of their virtual exchange projects and their experience and connection to research. So I'll hand it off, and I think we're going to start over with Shahad, if that's right.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Shahad Alsharif. I'm from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and I am a behavior analyst. That's what I do. I am an adjunct at Curtin University in Australia, and at the time when I did the COIL project with Dr. Vicky Spencer, I was an assistant professor at Dar al-Hikmah University in Saudi, and that's where we did it.
Thank you. Shahad and I go back about 4 years. She was a student at Columbia University. I was faculty at Dar al-Hikmah University in Jeddah. And we had a colleague, Cindy Smith, who is now in Australia at Curtin. So Shahad is there. So, the world looks large, but it's really not that large. So we were doing COIL before we knew we were doing COIL. And when I came to Shenandoah and heard about COIL, got involved. I am the academic coordinator for COIL, so I oversee the training, implement the training every semester, and know many of you, and I've traveled to some of your universities. I am a faculty, I'm the professor of applied behavior analysis and the director of that program as well. It's in the psychology department.
You want to talk just really quickly about your project and then your the research that you did?
Okay. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Just really quickly, yeah.
So yes, before COIL, we were already starting to do research. So we were looking at families in Saudi Arabia, Australia, and the US and looking cross-culturally at how autism is identified, what type of services, diagnosis, implementation, interventions. We were looking at that, and actually out of the research we were doing became COIL. So then we started doing these additional projects. My first COIL was actually with a professor at Malaysia, IIUM, and I started with a project there. It led to these other projects. So I guess I'm on my 5th project now, so.
That's really great. Thanks, Vicky. And thanks, I asked you to introduce that because I think it's interesting. I think from research grew a COIL, and I think from this next pair, we're going to find out a different approach. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you all. Dina, do you want to introduce yourself and
Yes,
your program?
thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Dina Sijamhodzic-Nadarevic. I'm associate professor working at the Sarajevo University, Bosnia and Herzegovina. I did COIL projects, 2 COIL projects with my colleague and friend, Professor Catherine Shiffman from Shenandoah University. We are really grateful to have opportunity to share our experiences related to the COIL research. We did 2 COIL projects. The first project, entitled Intercultural and Interreligious Values in University and College of Education Programs, was implemented during the pandemic time, and it lasted 2 semesters. Our project explored how university and college of education programs in both countries, in the United States and in Bosnia and Herzegovina, define and promote intercultural values. First, we did research on international and national frameworks, documents, policies, recommendations, and so on, related to intercultural education. After that, we were analyzing how those intercultural values were implemented in some education preparation programs in the 2 countries in terms of inclusive curricula, teaching materials, some intercultural, interreligious projects, and so on. We were very ambitious at that time, and the whole project lasted throughout the academic year. Students at the end were supposed to create or present an intercultural educational event at the university or in the community.
Hi, I'm Kathy Shiffman. I'm a professor of leadership studies here at Shenandoah University. And I teach adults in our educational leadership doctoral program and an organizational leadership doctoral program. So I'll tell you a little bit about our second COIL, and then maybe I'll talk a little bit about our research interests. So for our second COIL, we had a focus on educational leadership and what is the nature of educational leadership in our 2 countries. So we put students, again, into intercultural teams, tried to do half and half Bosnian, half American. They had to select an educational leadership position to focus on. Then they looked at national frameworks, best practices for that position. They then did a couple of interviews with education leaders, and then they put together a presentation or video. So my research interest in COIL and virtual exchange stems mostly from wanting to know how to do it better. And so how to design virtual exchanges for my students. So there are not as many resources out there on doing COIL for adult learners, and I'm still trying to find resources for doing it specific to my field, educational leadership. So we've been able to collaborate on a few projects. We've done a couple of presentations. I've done a few in my own field and, written a couple of articles.
Thank you, Kathy. Hopefully in this panel, what we're going to try to accomplish in a couple of minutes and then leave some time for questions from you all, we want to look at identifying the value of research to serve the virtual exchange field. We're going to hopefully share a couple of comments on the challenges and successes of research, and then also maybe share some recommendations for attendees, those of us here and those of us listening, about how to engage with research in this field. And so, Kathy, since you had the mic, maybe you can kick us off answering this first question that we've talked about a little bit. So for all of you, from your perspectives as faculty members, as COIL implementers, as researchers in the education field, I wonder, to you, what is the value of research in virtual exchange and for the COIL field?
So I think virtual exchange has huge potential, whether we're trying to support intercultural understanding and collaboration, expanded perspectives about a field or discipline, or awareness of how we fit in, where's our place in the broader global community and economy. But these are really big, ambitious goals that involve complex learning processes, right? So they can also require a lot of work for those of us who've tried it out on the part of both faculty and students. So we want to do it well. So yes, we can do a simple virtual exchange, then we can look at some student feedback and activities that suggest maybe engagement happened and learning occurred. But without research, what do we really know about the learning that occurred, why it occurred in the way that it did, and for whom? What do we know about the long-term impacts of the experience on the individuals involved? Did it contribute to an expanded interest and commitment to the intended goals? What if it had no impact? Or even worse, what if it had a negative impact? And there are just lots of design questions, right? Can a virtual exchange be replicated? What is essential? Where do variation and adaptation strengthen a virtual exchange? So I think if we want to deepen the learning potential of virtual exchanges, and there's so much potential, we need a robust research base to help us understand these processes, anticipate challenges, and identify strategies, approaches, and supports.
Yeah, I think that's a really good start. And we talked about, I think, Shahad, you had a really good example of how research can help inform this practice, right?
Yes. So, just to build off on what Kathy had said, research drives practice. And to share our students' experiences and how being part of a COIL project impacted their learning is, the way to do it is through research and publishing that research to share it with the academic community and people who have similar interests, to really measure how students' learning was impacted prior to beginning the COIL project, during and after, and sharing it, publishing it, is really, really significant in ways that, this is how we get our approach into teaching, how to find the positive strategies to utilize to really have a positive outcome on our students.
It's really great. It's not only good to, do the research and publish it, it has to be used, right?
Yeah, of course.
One thing I would add as well is we've talked about research, driving what we teach, but the research also tells us how we teach, particularly when we're talking about, internationally, virtual education. And what I think of as being the COIL academic coordinator, when I'm working with Eunice and we're looking at applications, we're choosing who's going to be partnering, working together. If I'm going to say, COIL, this is something that you want to do, you really want to implement this in your classroom, they want to see the research. They want to see the research behind this, that it's evidence-based, and that there's enough research out there to show us that what we're doing, the student outcomes are being met. And we can only find out if those student outcomes are being met if we're collecting the data on those. At Shenandoah University, we have a assessment tool that we use throughout the university, and now it's also being implemented among our COIL. So before any of our projects start, we have a pre-test. We also have a post-test that we're using with the students and with the faculty, as well as some reflections. So when, I know we had a professor working on some research this past semester, and they reached out to our assessment coordinator and said, we need the research on X, Y, and Z from the semester we did this. Well, we had access to that. So then when they were able to write up their study, they had the actual data to publish.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really important. And Dina, when we were talking about this, I think you also mentioned not only is the value for improving practice, but you also mentioned the value to universities and faculty members. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I would emphasize, as Kyle told, the impact and the great value for both faculty and students, as well as for our institutions. Since academic institutions through COIL research and publications increase their recognition in terms of internationalization, in terms of recognition. When it comes to the faculty, COIL research provides important outcomes, including opportunities for scholarly collaboration and experimentation with new teaching approaches. On that way, we are discovering the value of co-teaching and collaboration and research at international level. Through COIL research, faculty are also engaged with interdisciplinary and transnational issues, and the whole process increases our curiosity, prompts further questions. We get insights into various methodological approaches, and that stimulates further research. When it comes to the students, of course, COIL research has a great value in terms of methodological skills, improving methodological skills. Students explore different perspectives and apply conceptual knowledge in practice. We could also mention some other outcomes when it comes to the students and values for them, including development of intercultural competencies, global citizenship, digital literacy, teamwork, and problem solving. When it comes to my students have strengthened themselves in terms of conversation and research in foreign language, in English language, and presenting research results in English. And if I may add just one more thing, we should not forget the human factor when we speak about the COIL research and values. Because through this process, we develop friendship relations, professors as well as students. It's very important.
I think that last point is really good because that human factor enables it continues the cycle, right? I think like that research enables future COILs, or that COIL enables futures research, and so we see the cycle continuing, and that isn't possible without those human connections that are built. I also really appreciate something that Dina shared in that answer, that it's possible through a COIL collaboration or through a virtual exchange collaboration to, and a value of that of COIL, right? And COIL research is that students, graduate students, adult learners, undergraduate students can learn research methodologies and international research methodologies in a way that it's really difficult to do in almost any other way. I think that's a very important value of participating in a COIL exchange. That's something that's really important to remember. One other thing that I think we've talked about also is one value, and I think maybe we'll get to it, is the incentive of participating in research for the professional development, right, of faculty members too. And so, but maybe before we get there, Dina, I think I'll come back to you for this question. I think one, central component of virtual exchange or COIL is that it provides, cultural or global learning opportunity to both sides of an exchange or to all sides of a multi-sided exchange. And so maybe the question then is, does this model where two or more international communities are learning from each other, what are the research implications of that model? Does it make that research more interesting, or what are the outcomes of those multiple sides, right, involved in the research?
Through the whole process, I could identify at least 3 research implications that come out of the COIL research. The first one could be research in general on COIL approach, which we did during the trainings for professors who would lead the COIL projects. We were learning and researching a lot about the COIL approach as a group of professors from Malaysia, from the United States, from Bosnia. At the same time, we face different methodological approaches in planning our research projects. So this led to creative ideas, stimulative research questions, but at the same time, we had to reformulate some preconceived ideas about research projects, and the whole process at the end led to completely new, sometimes unexpected research projects.
It almost sounds like some things that your students like go through right during the COIL. Like we thought it was going to be this, and then we came
Yes,
up with a
but
new
then-
thing, right? Yeah. Please continue. Yeah.
It seems to me that we need more research when it comes to the perceptions of professors who led the COIL project with students. So the question that Kyle raised could be a good starting point to do further research, at least among those groups that were participating within the Barzinji COIL projects. Another research implication could be, actually it is, research in the classrooms, within the teaching process, in cooperation with professors and students. What could also arise from the COIL when it comes to the research could be cooperation of professors, COIL partners in terms of mentoring, dissertations, doctoral dissertations, theses, and so on. It would be worth, I think. And the third implication, research implication, could be research and publishing done by COIL partners. We have, Kathy already mentioned that we have published some works together, book chapter, we presented at the conferences, and so on.
Did you want to?
Sure, I'll just quickly build on many of the things Dina said. You know, I agree. As researchers, we're trained in a particular context. We tend to operate with certain practices and approaches that guide how we define research problems. So I've found, and I think in general, an international research partnership can open up new ways of thinking about one's field or discipline. And it helps us sort of re-examine how we understand problems and solutions, whether we're talking theoretically or practically. And so I found this an incredibly enriching research experience. And I think it also offers an opportunity to explore, as Dina said, varied methodological approaches to doing research.
Vicky, I wonder if you could talk a little bit. I think we were talking about how it's possible for like the students, right? Your students as a part of your course to gain something from the intersection of those two cultures, or the learning from those two cultures.
Yeah, I always bring it back to, what's going to work for our students. Well, I teach a research methods class. They're graduate level students. My first project was with IIUM, a freshman course on sustainability. And I've got graduate students in research methods. Well, one of the things you learn about COIL is that if you need a starting point, start with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Because any focus that you need or want from any course can be found in those UN Sustainable Development Goals. So what we looked at is zero hunger, which made so much sense. It was during COVID. So while the students were really focusing on what was happening in Malaysia, what was happening in the US, I taught through the research methods course how to find the research. How do you conduct research? How do you identify what is the research that's going on in this field? So they came together, they built it on the research that my students were doing based on what they were doing, and then we put together, the students put together, not me, the students put together a bibliography of what they were finding. Where is the research on this topic? So did my students come into a behavior analysis class thinking they were going to look at food insecurities to learn how to do research? No, but they absolutely loved learning research. And research is research, right? I mean, the methodology is the methodology. So that was our starting point to really learning the basics of research.
One of the things I've enjoyed in preparing for this panel is getting to engage with these two pairs who have such it's a really nice like working relationship. You can tell that they've been working together for a long time, and really have a close professional relationship. And I know research is seldom done in isolation. Especially good research, I think, is seldom done in isolation. And so I wonder how, asking you all to talk just a little bit about this professional relationship you all have built and how that fosters good research, and maybe how the COIL model of virtual exchange, where faculty pairs build that close professional relationship, can help foster good research. And I think, yeah, Shahad, do you want to start over there?
Yes. So just like Vicky mentioned, we got to know each other through working on different research projects before working on a COIL project. And our relationship working as co-researchers on these prior research projects led us to conducting a COIL project. I had no idea what was COIL until I heard about it from Vicky. Having that time to even work more closely together on a different type of project, which was COIL, between our classes, really gave us an opportunity to get to know each other more, which is a very unique type of opportunity that honestly doesn't happen that frequently across universities, across countries. So COIL really does provide that unique opportunity to get to know each other and learn how your styles are working together. And the more you work together, I mean, you'll know whether that is a person that you can continue to work with or not. And here we are, 4 or 5 years later, with a lot more projects to work on.
Kathy, did you want to talk just quickly about, yours?
Sure. So Dina and I met for the first time Saturday night. So we met for the first time Saturday night, but we've been collaborating since December of 2020 through COIL. And I mean, it is so difficult to develop an international research partnership without a prior connection. And I think COIL offers that. So when you're developing and carrying out a COIL, that means the faculty are spending a lot of time together, talking and planning, figuring out how to operate the video. So we're learning how we collaborate as a pair to get the COIL work done. And in that process, we're building trust. So Dina and I had so many conversations while we were developing our COIL collaborations, and so we bonded professionally and personally. We talked about our research interests, our faculty responsibilities, and that's led to a really productive relationship.
Yeah, thank you. You want to talk really quickly about Dina, and then we're gonna keep moving on.
I will just share one personal story because we realized that this session is very serious. When we were introducing each other, when we were getting to know each other at the beginning during the training sessions, which led Professor Greg, we were recording videos and so on, and very often we were feeling that we were in unpleasant position, but it helped us because it increased our empathy towards our students who would further work on research within COIL projects.
I think that's good. I think sometimes, these panels can be a little bit serious, especially when we're talking about research and the value of research to an academic field. But we're going to get a little bit more serious because I want to talk about the challenges of research and virtual exchange. And so, again, Dina, since you have the mic, I think a lot of people here are familiar with basic challenges, common challenges of academic research. It's hard to get students to fill out a survey, right? It's hard to figure out how to find time to publish. It's hard to get maybe your institution's IRB board to email you back, right? So there are common challenges for conducting research, but I wonder what are unique challenges that involve, like when you're researching about COIL or about virtual exchange. And so we'll do a quick round about some challenges and then a quick round about some successes.
To be honest, there are many challenges we faced. Maybe it could depend on the institutional context as well. When it comes to my position, I could say that COIL projects and research takes additional effort and time. Speaking from my own position and institutional context, I could share that I was volunteering when I was doing COIL projects, and my students were also volunteering. It means for both groups, it was additional work, extra work. Regarding the university procedures, COIL cannot, in Sarajevo University, at Sarajevo University, cannot be recognized as a part of the overall teaching norm. So I couldn't conduct COIL projects within one course with one group of students who were attending that course. So I had to motivate students from different study programs to take part in the COIL projects. For students, as I told, it was additional work, but we enthusiastically accepted that. We witnessed that here. There are other challenges, for example, time difference, we were speaking about that. Additional resources that we need, for example, financial support. There were some situations, for example, I had to send some students to our other cities to do some interviews with educational leaders, but we didn't have budget for that. You know, organizational and administrative support, also literature and so on. There are many challenges. Maybe someone else could speak about other challenges.
I think that's a really good start.
Yeah.
Vicky, did you want to talk quickly about maybe working with the students?
Well, I just have to say that it's interesting that, you know, through every presentation you've heard today, the whole issue of time difference came up nearly every time.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to say the same thing. And if I look at my notes, the first thing I wrote was about the time difference, because you have to figure out those challenges. The other challenge that, you know, again, working with the students and with faculty is what platform are you going to use? And thanks to Mira, my Malaysian counterpart, taught me to do all of my projects on LinkedIn. So I work all of my projects on LinkedIn because everybody worldwide can get a free LinkedIn account. And now I've begun doing other projects just within my classroom with LinkedIn because it's so accessible to our students. And I would have never known that had I not started working closely with Mira. And that's all I'll add.
I think that's really great to figure out, you know, like both what are the challenges and then how to overcome some of them. I wanted to turn it over to Kathy because I think you brought up a really great challenge when it comes to the ethics and the ethics of research. So.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly say, I think that's a piece we really need to understand and manage the ethical dimensions of conducting research that involves students and faculty as human subjects. And you're doing that at two different institutions in different countries. So what does that look like? What needs to happen in your institution? What needs to happen in your partner's institution? You know, in the US, universities require that we submit our research plan for approval by our university's institutional review board to ensure ethical research practices. But that's not necessarily how it works at the University of Sarajevo, so we need to sort of work that through.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And you also mentioned some other things about, like, you know, like when we do this collaborative work, whose resources are we using, right? And also, like, I think a really good, like, what language are things happening in, you know, like who's doing most of the work, right? So I think thinking about all of those ethical questions early, I think is really important to bring up when we're talking about especially in collaboration with others, right? I think it's really important.
If I may add, Kyle, Kathy and me faced another challenge when it comes to COIL research. We were facing the differences in terms of methodological skills of our students. Kathy's students are PhD students, and my students were mostly undergraduates, some masters, some doctoral students. So we managed somehow to direct those differences.
Yeah, depending on what the COIL is or what the research project is, figuring out, you know, how to. So each I think research project is going to face its own unique challenges too. I don't want to end or like pass it over to questions on challenges. I wanted to give a quick opportunity for people to share some successes. And so maybe Shahad, if it's okay, I'll ask you to just share your perspective on a success that you've had in research.
So going into the project, and a little bit about Saudi students, if it's not going to end up with grades, they will most likely not do it. So that motivation of it having to be a project, part of the course requirements, was really essential going into the COIL project. It was mandatory. There was not an option, unlike or opposite to Dina's experience. It was voluntary, right? And going into it, they were telling me, Dr. Shahad, why do we have to do it with students from Shenandoah University? Why can't just we do our presentations in our class, you know? And I'm like, there's a lot of different objectives that are gonna come out of this project, and you're gonna find out once this project is completed. And I really wish, and you know, now we plan for the next COIL project, what are we going to measure before and after doing a COIL project, was the students' outcomes. It was an incredible learning experience for them. The evaluations they gave me at the end of that course that semester were the best evaluations I've ever had. It was the best learning experience according to them, and navigating this, you know, new learning experience, how to work with students in a different country from a different cultural background. One of the earliest things I told them at the beginning of the project was, ladies, at some point, Thanksgiving holiday will fall into, you know, close to the submission. So just make sure you're planning ahead. So they had to look up Thanksgiving. It's not a holiday that we celebrate in Saudi. And then closer to Thanksgiving, one of the students was like, Dr. Shahad, they're not answering us. I'm like, what did I say about Thanksgiving? do not text them during this holiday. So really the students' learning outcomes is something that I'm really proud of. And I encourage anyone who has this opportunity to definitely embrace it. You'll be surprised about what you learn and what your students are gonna learn.
Kathy, do you want to talk about some of your successes or your perspective on
Sure.
that?
Well, I sort of look at myself in this as a work in progress. So between doing some COILs and then I did a fairly extensive literature review as well of research, because I couldn't find what I needed around adult learners and doctoral students in educational leadership. So my research, I hope, is helping me to improve how I design and carry out exchanges. So based on what I've learned at this point, what do I plan to do next? I plan to increase. Remember, my students are educational leadership and organizational leadership students. So I plan to increase the learning focus on the intercultural group development and processes piece with assigned readings and reflections targeting that. That maps really well into what the programs are supposed to be doing. Practically, I think we need to schedule additional synchronous working meetings and having our students going out in breakout rooms to deal with that time difference, particularly when you have adults who are working full time. It just adds a whole nother layer of complexity to that time difference. So I hope, my goal is that my research efforts will benefit my particular field, educational leadership, because there's really not much, if anything. And then direct more attention to the needs, preferences, and outcomes of adult learners in virtual exchange, because I think there's huge potential there.
Yeah, I think that's great. Dina, do you want to share a success really briefly? And then I'll also ask Vicky, maybe instead of a success, I'll ask you to share your recommendation. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Kyle. We could say that we are very proud, Kathy and me, because we managed to implement the first COIL project during the pandemic time without no previous experience in leading the COIL projects. We managed to do that, but it was important for our students, of course, because of the socialization at that time. We also set very clear goals at the beginning of our collaboration during the pandemic time, that we will do research and publish some academic works. We have been working on that and following those goals enthusiastically. We have been preparing another article to be published. So I'm proud that my student Aida is here, and student collaborated enthusiastically. We are very proud because of that fact.
Big success, absolutely. Do you want to share, some recommendations for everybody? And then maybe we'll have 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Sorry, I went over a little bit.
In terms of support and resources, I know with our program, we're very, very fortunate because we have support from the Associate Provost, Amy Sarch, and Greg, he'll love that, Jeff Coker, the College of Arts and Sciences. They have actually traveled and visited some of the universities that we've been to in partnerships. So not just faculty who are implementing COIL, getting to travel and meet and develop these partnerships, but when some of the upper administration is actively involved as well. So they see the value, pass on the value to us, we pass on the value to our students. And that's been really, really effective in terms of resources. The other thing that we're doing with our, I keep pushing COIL, can you tell, as being the academic coordinator, is adding some resources on our own website that show where faculty can publish their work, different conferences they can apply to present, and different ways to access resources that we all need.
Yeah, I think it's a great recommendation to bring this research directly to institutional leadership, is just put it in front of them. So important. I've failed as a moderator to really save enough time for the audience, but I want to turn it over to a question from the audience for our panel. Anybody have a question? Yeah. Raise your hand first. Yeah, Veronica up front, and then we'll maybe try to go quickly. And then I did see a hand in the back if we have.
So I kind of heard from both partnerships a little bit about how your institutions were or were not supporting some of the assessment. I'm curious of how, if that was a thought, or for the next iteration, you're thinking about how to link at the course level to these broader program goals or institutional goals. Would that help, for further advancing the integration into a credit course, or building out further support opportunities right from the research office, let's say?
Oh,
Yeah.
So what we did, because I just talked.
Oh yeah, no problem.
So one of the things that we did is I actually went and sat down with our assessment course coordinator, and we looked at the outcomes generally for our COIL projects that we're wanting to focus on. And we made sure that we're looking at it at the course level, but we're also looking at it at the university level, so that there's that direct connection between the two. We don't want the disconnect. We want them to be the same. Is that kind of what, okay.
May I add something? Thank you for your question. I think we should promote the COIL research and projects to our educational leaders as an approach that leads to internationalization. For us, it was very important to host Dr. Amy Sarch, Associate Provost here at the Shenandoah University, and Dr. Jeff Coker, the Dean at Sarajevo University, through their visit, lectures, meetings with our educational leaders, deans, vice rector, professors, and students. I could feel that our people at the university better understood and recognized the values of the COIL research projects, and they also presented us another approach, town hall approach, and we are thinking about that to implement. It was very important. If I may add one more thing, we were presenting informations, news about COIL projects that we have done at the faculty webpage, university webpage. We presented that in the local media, local newspapers. So people heard those stories, they were reading, and students were much more motivated after hearing all of those stories about the COIL projects. It's a long process, but it can affect.
Yeah, I think we might have time for one other question. Are you sure? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Another question? Yeah, right here. And I think while we get ready, Veronica, I think that's a really great question. Figuring out how to really tie that assessment and make sure that's feeding our research project and iterating. I think that's really great.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. You say this is the most serious. I think this is the most exciting sessions that I had, because research, teaching is just two things that I love the most. So you mentioned something about evidence-based Vicky, which is, I think this is not what most of the universities is actually focused about. So how would you amplify this evidence-based outside publications? I think when it comes to publications, we do know it actually hits certain part of the public, right? But I think we should amplify this outside the classroom, like to the public in general. How would you suggest that we could do that?
Yeah. If we understand your question, how do we take some of like the results of the research, right? And say like, so there's this evidence of the outcomes of participation in COIL or virtual exchange. How do we share that outside of the academy, outside of the university, with the public? This is a great question and something we think about at the Stevens Initiative a lot. I wonder if you all have.
I mean, I would say one of the things I talked when I was writing on my notes, we've been involved in this now since January of 2021, and it has been an ongoing progression of how do we collect the data, how do we make sure that it's reliable and it's valid so that we can report that data, and then we have to have people out there researching, giving us the results, but we all know it's got to be about replication, and that was one of the points Kathy brought up. Can we replicate this? So that we can validate it and make sure that it's reliable. I think we're at the early stages of that. And I think assessment, like you said early on, that's a standalone section on its own, is dealing with assessment and how do we continue to get that research out there?
If I can also maybe reply, I think it's also in how we talk about those outcomes. I think at the Stevens Initiative, we talk about global competencies, right? We've measured it for years. We put it in our impact and learning reports, and we say, participation in virtual exchange or COIL has this outcome in global competencies. We can see the effect size of X number in participating in a virtual exchange. If I talk to my dad about what that means, he's not an academic. He doesn't he's a smart guy. But he doesn't understand what that means, right? But if I say, oh, participating in a virtual exchange means this young person can understand this other place that they've never been to a little bit better than they did before. We understand what that is. And so then how do we take an assessment domain or a research outcome or that academic speak and translate it into terms that I think everyday people can understand to then promote, right, to the public? And I think Dina even talked about that, putting it on the website, and how do you promote it to students, to other people in the community, I think is important. Maybe, would you like to say something? And then this will probably wrap us up.
Okay, I would just refer to the question that Dr. Maria raised at the beginning. It was a very important question for me. Do we see the impact when it comes to the students? Are they, after participating in the COIL projects, are much more motivated to take part in those academic mobility programs in person? I could notice that my students were not that much encouraged, to take a part, for example, in Erasmus Plus program, European academic mobility programs. And the scholarships are great. I noticed after doing COIL project that students were more encouraged, at least some of them took a part in Erasmus Plus programs, and we could measure that. We could see those outcomes.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you. I think what I'm taking away from this panel is a lot of encouragement. I think this helps solidify in my head that not only do we have faculty members that are implementing great COIL and virtual exchange courses, we have faculty members that are really interested in conducting the research to improve those courses and to really help us to understand what are the outcomes of those programs. And so I want to thank our panelists for presenting today. I think that was really great. I learned a lot, and thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.